My dear friends, before we start, I asked you all to press a like and leave your comment. This will help a lot to promote this video and to release news stories as soon as possible. It's not hard for you, but it's a pleasure for me. Thank you. There are some places people are just better off avoiding, some doors best left unopened. And then there are mistakes. Decisions made with the best intentions but doomed to go horribly wrong. I used to think I understood the world, could explain things with science, with reason. I was wrong. Sometimes the darkness is simply the darkness. My name is Wade, and this is the story of what happened at Bax Folk Research Facility. A place hidden deep in the Blackstone Woods, far away from any curious eyes or nosy journalists. We thought it was the perfect setup for our research, isolated, self-sufficient, and untouched by regulations or morality. But that isolation became our undoing. I should have seen it coming. Should have known something wasn't right from the moment we began. But by the time I realized, it was already too late. There were 5 of us. 5 researchers, each with our own specialties, our own ambitions, and all of us led by one visionary, Brenna Bennett. She was brilliant, fearless even, and believed the mind held more power than anyone could possibly imagine. What we see, what we feel, she said once, it's only the surface. There's a whole world beyond what our senses allow us to perceive. Her latest theory, something she called the Beyond Experiment, was about unlocking that hidden world. The idea was that by stripping away a person's connection to the physical world, they could tap into something greater. We'll find the truth, she insisted. We'll transcend. It was insanity. But Brenna was relentless, and I was foolish enough to follow. We needed a volunteer, someone willing to endure the procedure. That's when we found Simon, a man broken by life. Simon had lost everything, his family, his purpose, and when we offered him a chance to contribute to something bigger than himself, he didn't hesitate. Do it, Simon said one cold morning, his voice flat, emotionless. I've got nothing left anyway. We had no idea how much he would lose in the end. Day 1, the procedure begins. It was an eerie scene. Simon lay in the center of the sterile room, surrounded by machines and monitors. His body was still, his eyes closed. One by one, we took away his senses. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. We severed his connections to the world, leaving him in total isolation, floating in his own mind. At first, Simon was calm. I watched the monitors. His brainwaves were steady, his heartbeat slow. I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe Brenna's theory wasn't so far-fetched after all. I feel nothing, Simon whispered when we asked how he was. It's peaceful. Brenna's face lit up with triumph. This is it. The first step toward transcendence. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the stillness in the room, the way Simon's voice trembled, that made me uneasy. Day 4, the whispers begin. I hear something, Simon said suddenly. We had been monitoring him around the clock, and until that point, everything had been quiet. But now, he was different. His voice was softer, his movements less controlled. What do you hear? Brenna asked, scribbling down notes furiously. I don't know. Whispers, maybe? It's like they're far away, just out of reach. I exchanged a glance with Hallie, one of the other researchers. She looked as concerned as I felt. What are they saying? Hallie asked, her voice tight. Simon shook his head. I can't make it out, but they're there. I'm not alone. Brenna, of course, was thrilled. He's starting to perceive what lies beyond the senses. She murmured, barely containing her excitement. But me? I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed the line. Day 7, the hollow voice. The whispers became louder, more insistent. Simon started talking to them, holding conversations with something none of us could hear. They're not like us. Simon whispered one night, his voice trembling. They don't belong here. Who are they? I asked, unable to hide the tension in my voice. Simon's face twisted in fear. They're angry. Brenna dismissed it as a natural side effect of the sensory deprivation. His mind is adjusting. she said confidently. We're unlocking deeper levels of consciousness. I wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. Simon wasn't adjusting. He was unraveling. Day 10, the entity appears. It happened while I was alone with Simon. The others had left for the night, but I stayed, watching over him, trying to understand what was happening. That's when I felt it, a cold, oppressive presence in the room. Simon sat bolt upright, his eyes wide despite being blind. "It's here," he gasped, the hollow voice. "It's here." I felt a chill race down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Simon's face contorted in terror. "It's not from this world. It's something else. It's been watching us, waiting." Suddenly, the lights flickered. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I swear I saw something dark and formless, moving in the corner of the room. "Wade," Simon whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's coming for all of us." Day 12, Brenna's obsession. Despite everything that was happening, Brenna refused to stop the experiment. "We've come too far," she said when I confronted her. "We're on the verge of a breakthrough." "A breakthrough?" I snapped, my voice shaking. "Simon's talking to something that shouldn't exist. We're in danger, Brenna." But she wouldn't listen. She was too far gone, blinded by her ambition, her obsession with proving her theory. "The hollow voice is real," Simon whispered later that night, his voice hollow. "It wants to break through." Day 15, the facility fights back. Things started going wrong around the facility. Lights flickered, machinery malfunctioned, and strange noises echoed through the halls at night. It was as if the entire place was rebelling against us. "It's the hollow voice," Simon whispered in one of his lucid moments. "It's trying to get in." I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd unleashed something far worse than we could handle. Day 18, the entity's attack. I was working late again, trying to make sense of Simon's readings when the lights went out completely. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over everything. And then I heard it, the whispers. They weren't coming from Simon this time. They were all around me, filling the room, pressing in on me from every direction. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. Just shadows. Dark, shifting shadows that moved through the air like smoke. And then I saw it. The hollow voice. It wasn't a person, not even a creature in the traditional sense. It was more like a presence, dark, formless, and suffocating. It loomed over Simon, whispering things I couldn't understand. Simon's body convulsed violently, his face twisted in terror. "It's here!" he screamed. "It's here! You've opened the door, and now it won't go back." Day 20, the breaking point. By now, everyone was on edge. Even Brenna was starting to crack. She refused to admit it, but I could see it in her eyes. The bravado was gone, replaced by a flicker of fear. "We need to end this," I said, my voice shaking with desperation. "We have to shut it down." But Brenna shook her head. "We're so close, Wade. Don't you see? We've found something extraordinary." "Extraordinary?" I snapped. "We've unleashed a nightmare." Day 22, the final stand. Simon was gone. The man we'd known was completely consumed by the hollow voice. He no longer spoke, no longer responded to us. He just lay there, his eyes wide, staring at something none of us could see. The facility had fallen into chaos. The whispers had become constant, a relentless presence that followed us wherever we went. And then, on the 22nd day, the hollow voice revealed its true power. It attacked. The shadows coalesced into a single, overwhelming entity. It moved through the walls, through the air, through us. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was alive, feeding off our fear, our despair. Day 23, the descent. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with the events that had unfolded. The hollow voice. It was more than just a shadow now. It had crossed over, manifesting in ways none of us could have predicted. We were no longer dealing with a scientific anomaly. We were facing something ancient, something malicious, something that had been lying dormant in the dark corners of reality, waiting for someone like us to set it free. Brenna was still refusing to admit what was happening. She kept insisting we were on the verge of a breakthrough, that this was exactly the kind of result she'd been aiming for, but her voice was thin, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Even Hallie, who had once been so devoted to the project, now openly questioned whether we could stop this thing. Simon was a shell of a human, barely clinging to life, and the whispers were growing louder. The facility itself felt like it was sinking into madness. Doors that had been locked opened on their own. The temperature dropped and rose erratically. It was like the place had come alive, reacting to whatever malevolent force Simon had summoned. The others were starting to crack under the pressure. Thomas, one of our engineers, stormed out of the research chamber, yelling that he'd seen something in the mirrors, a figure, lurking behind him, mimicking his every move. He refused to come back in, convinced the hollow voice had claimed him too. I couldn't blame him. Day 24, the escape plan. By the 24th day, it was clear that we were out of time. We needed to leave. I had hoped to convince Brenna, but she remained determined, almost manic. She paced the room, muttering to herself, flipping through her notes like they held some answer we hadn't yet discovered. "We've gone too far to stop now," she said, not even looking at me as I approached her. "It's responding. We just need to hold on a little longer, and we'll be able to communicate fully." "Brenna, listen to yourself," I practically shouted. "Simon is dying. The facility is falling apart around us. That thing, whatever it is, won't stop until we're all dead or worse." Brenna's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "You're wrong. This is the future of human understanding. We're unlocking something new. You're obsessed," I yelled. "We need to get out now, while we still can." But she wasn't hearing me. She hadn't been hearing me for days. The truth was, we'd lost her too. She was too far gone, too consumed by the desire to understand what was happening, to prove her theory, to be the one who unlocked the beyond. I knew there was only one option left. I had to gather the others and find a way out on our own. If we stayed, the hollow voice would consume us all, just as it had taken Simon. I approached Hallie first. She had been the most grounded of all of us, and despite the growing chaos, she was still trying to make sense of it all. But when I found her, she was sitting in front of one of the monitors, staring blankly at the screen. She barely acknowledged me as I entered the room. "Hallie," I said, crouching next to her. "We need to leave. This place, it's not safe anymore." She shook her head slowly. "It's too late, Wade," she whispered. The hollow voice. I can hear it now. It's everywhere. I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "We can still make it. But we need to leave. Now." For a moment, she stared at me, her eyes clouded with fear and confusion. And then, finally, she nodded. "Okay. But what about Brenna?" I hesitated. "She won't come. She's too far gone." Hallie's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "And Simon?" I glanced toward the room where Simon lay, motionless. The machines around him beeped erratically, a reminder of how unstable his condition had become. "We can't save him." Thomas was the hardest to convince. He was convinced that the hollow voice was hunting him, that no matter where we went, it would follow. But after hours of tense arguments, he finally agreed. We gathered what little supplies we could find, flashlights, portable batteries, maps, and prepared for the long trek through the underground tunnels that led away from Baxfolk. As we descended into the tunnels, the oppressive presence of the hollow voice seemed to follow us, growing stronger with each step we took. The walls were cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of decay. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us, pressing in on us from every side. "I can hear them," Hallie said, her voice trembling. "They're right behind us. Keep moving," I urged, though my own heart was pounding in my chest. We pressed forward, deeper into the tunnels. The whispers turned into voices, low, guttural things that spoke of fear and despair, of loss and darkness. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the air grow colder, as if the hollow voice itself was breathing down my neck. And then, the shadows began to move. It started slowly at first, a dark mass shifting along the walls, creeping closer. But soon, the shadows were all around us, closing in, taking on the shape of something wrong. I saw glimpses of twisted faces, eyes glowing with an unnatural light, mouths whispering words that I couldn't understand. "Wade!" Hallie's scream jolted me out of my paralysis. I turned to see her pointing ahead, her face pale with terror. There, standing in the middle of the tunnel, was the hollow voice. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a creature in the traditional sense. It was a mass of darkness, writhing and shifting, its form constantly changing as it loomed over us. And within that darkness, I could see faces of those it had consumed. Simon, countless others. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. "It's here," Hallie whispered, backing away slowly. "It's come for us." I raised my flashlight, shining it directly at the hollow voice, but the light did nothing to stop it. It moved closer, its presence suffocating, its whispers growing louder and more frantic. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Hallie's hand and pulling her down the tunnel. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the darkness. The hollow voice followed, its whispers turning into a deafening roar. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder and thinner with each step. I could feel it behind me, its cold, suffocating presence pressing against my back, its whispers filling my mind. "You can't escape," the voice said, clear now, booming inside my head. "You opened the door. Now you belong to me." Just when I thought we couldn't run any farther, the tunnel opened up into a large chamber. And there, in the center of the room, was something I hadn't expected, a massive, rusted metal door, half buried in the wall. "The exit," I gasped, dragging Hallie toward it. But before we could reach it, the hollow voice surged forward, its dark form wrapping around us, pulling us back into the shadows. I felt its cold fingers dig into my skin, heard its whispers turning into screams. "No!" I shouted, struggling against it. "We're not yours!" But the hollow voice only laughed, its laughter echoing through the chamber. I could feel the darkness closing in, feel it pulling me under, when suddenly, a blinding light filled the room. The hollow voice recoiled, its form shuddering in the light, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. Hallie was beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. We made it," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "But it's not over. It will never be over." We made it out of Baxfolk, but the hollow voice never truly left us. Even now, I can still hear its whispers, feel its cold presence lurking just out of sight. Brennan never left the facility. She stayed behind, convinced that she could control it, that she could unlock its secrets. But we all knew the truth. The hollow voice wasn't something that could be controlled. It was a force beyond our understanding, a darkness that had been waiting for centuries to be unleashed. And now that it had been set free, there was no going back. I still have nightmares about that place, about the faces in the shadows, about the whispers that never stop. Hallie and I tried to move on, tried to live normal lives, but we both know that we'll never truly escape the hollow voice. Because once you've opened the door to the beyond, it never really closes. Day 25, the echoes. The following day was a blur. Hallie and I had made it out of Baxfolk, but neither of us could shake the feeling that the hollow voice was still with us. It wasn't just a distant memory or a haunting recollection. It was something more immediate, something alive. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind that rattled the windows at night, seemed to carry a whisper of that darkness, like a memory that wouldn't fade. We'd been staying at a motel on the edge of a small town called Fallbrook, just far enough away from Baxfolk that we hoped to feel safe, but close enough that we hadn't fully escaped the pull of the place. The motel was run down, its peeling wallpaper and flickering lights adding to the sense of unease that had settled over us. Hallie had barely spoken since we left, and I was struggling to keep myself together. We had no phones, no internet, and no way to contact the outside world. Part of me wondered if that was by design, like Baxfolk had cut us off from reality, forcing us to exist in this liminal space, halfway between what was real and what wasn't. That night, I dreamed of the hollow voice again. I saw its dark form, shifting and writhing, and heard the voices of those it had consumed. Simon was there, along with Thomas and others whose faces I didn't recognize, all of them whispering words over and over. "You let it out. You can never take it back." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the whisper still echoing in my ears. "Wade?" Hallie's voice was barely a whisper. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window into the dark, her hands gripping the edge of the mattress so tightly her knuckles were white. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "You okay?" She didn't respond right away, her gaze still fixed on something out in the night. I heard it again. I swallowed hard, the pit in my stomach growing. "What did you hear?" "The voice," she said, her tone eerily calm. "It's still here, Wade. It's following us." I didn't want to believe her. I wanted to tell her that we were safe now, that whatever happened in Baxfolk was over. But deep down, I knew she was right. The hollow voice wasn't confined to that cursed facility. It had latched onto us, and it wasn't going to let go. We needed a plan. Staying in Fulbert wasn't an option anymore. I could feel the hollow voice getting closer, like it was tightening its grip on us the longer we stayed in one place. "We need to leave," I said, pacing the small motel room. "Get as far away from here as we can." Hallie nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. "And go where? It's not like we can outrun it. It'll follow us wherever we go." I didn't have an answer for that. She was right, of course. But we couldn't just sit here and wait for it to consume us. "We have to try," I said, more to convince myself than her. "We can't just give up." Hallie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know if running is going to help us. What if we need to face it?" I stopped pacing, turning to look at her. "Face it? Hallie, this isn't something we can fight. It's not human. It's not even physical." "I know that," she said quietly, "but maybe there's a way to stop it. There has to be something we missed, something in Baxfolk." The thought of going back to that place sent a shiver down my spine. Every instinct in me screamed against it. "You're not serious." "I am," she said, meeting my eyes. "Think about it. The hollow voice didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was triggered by something we did, something Simon did. Maybe if we go back, we can figure out how to reverse it." "And what if we can't?" I asked, my voice rising with fear. "What if going back makes it worse?" She didn't have an answer for that, but I could see the determination in her eyes. Hallie was always the logical one, the one who needed answers. And right now, the only answer she had was that we needed to go back. "I'm not going back there," I said, shaking my head. "I can't." Hallie stood up, her expression hardening. "You don't have to, Wade. But I'm going." It took everything in me to agree to go back to Baxfolk. The thought of returning to that cursed place filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. But I couldn't let Hallie go alone. I knew the hollow voice was dangerous, and if she went back there on her own, she might not make it out again. We left Fulbert early the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon as we drove back toward Baxfolk. The road was empty, eerily quiet, the landscape barren and desolate. It was like the world itself knew that nothing good ever came from this place. By the time we reached the outskirts of the facility, the sky had turned a sickly gray, thick clouds swirling overhead. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I could hear the whispers again, faint but persistent, as if the hollow voice was already aware of our presence. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. Hallie nodded, her jaw set in determination. "We need to end this, Wade. For Simon. For everyone." We parked the car near the edge of the forest that surrounded the facility and made our way toward the entrance. The building loomed ahead of us, its once pristine walls now covered in grime and overgrown with vines. The windows were dark, the place abandoned, yet I could feel the weight of the hollow voice pressing down on us, watching our every move. The inside of the facility was just as we had left it, dark, cold, and unsettlingly quiet. Our footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and every shadow seemed to shift and move just out of sight. The air felt thick, like we were walking through a fog, and the temperature had dropped significantly since we entered. We headed straight for the research chamber, where everything had gone wrong. The room was in disarray, equipment scattered across the floor, broken glass and wires tangled in a chaotic mess. And there, in the center of it all, was the mirror, the portal that Simon had opened, the doorway to the hollow voice. Hallie approached the mirror cautiously, her eyes scanning the surface for any signs of movement. "It's still here," she whispered. "I can feel it." I stayed back, my heart pounding in my chest. The mirror was intact, but something about it felt different now. The air around it seemed to pulse with energy, like the hollow voice was waiting just on the other side, watching us, biding its time. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Hallie didn't answer right away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, Simon's journal. "He wrote about this," she said, flipping through the pages. "He believed the hollow voice was a manifestation of energy, a kind of sentient darkness that existed in parallel to our world. He thought that by using the mirrors he could control it." "Control it?" I repeated, my stomach turning. "That's insane." "I know," Hallie said, her voice tight. "But if Simon was right, then there's a way to close the door. We just need to find the right frequency." "Frequency?" I asked, confused. "Simon believed that the hollow voice could be disrupted by sound waves," she explained. "If we can generate the right frequency, we might be able to push it back, close the door for good." It took hours to rig the equipment we needed. Hallie worked tirelessly, her hands shaking with exhaustion but her focus unwavering. I helped where I could, but the technical aspects of the project were beyond me. All I could do was watch and pray that she knew what she was doing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped back from the console, her face pale but determined. "It's ready," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, my throat dry. "What now?" "We activate it," she said simply, "and hope it works." The moment she pressed the button, the air in the room changed. A low, humming sound filled the space, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. The mirror began to shake, its surface rippling like water, and I could feel the hollow voice pushing against it, trying to break through. And then, the whispers returned, louder this time, more frantic, more desperate. "You can't stop me," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "I am eternal. I am everywhere." I backed away, my heart racing. "Hallie, it's not working. Give it time," she shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. The mirror pulsed violently, the surface warping and twisting as the hollow voice fought to break free. The air grew colder, the room darkening as the shadows closed in around us. I could feel its presence now, stronger than ever, like a weight pressing down on my chest.